All right, we're talking about pressure control. All right, PCV. So I'm gonna start with the waveform. Right, I'm gonna start writing it here. Over here. The waveform. Why am I starting with the waveform? Because not every hospital. You go to a hospital that doesn't have like people. That's manual. You have to build in a system, in an order system, that you have the 5 set parameters, for example, for every mode. So when you enter orders, you can't get out of the orders until you fill all the 5 set parameters. They're all asterisks, for example, right? If you don't put the asterisks, people are not going to write it. Example, our BiPAP order doesn't have asterisks on the IPAP and the EPAP, and people don't fill it all the time. This is human nature. So the point I want to make is that you have to know how many at least parameters you need to think about when you're writing these orders. So for volume control 4, for pressure control 5, for SIMV 5, for APRV and bi-level is 6, right? So we'll start with the pressure waveform and we'll see. So basically, first you're telling the vent how high you want to be above the baseline, and you don't want to go below that ever. That is the PEEP. PEEP. And then you're telling the vent how high above the PEEP you want to go, and you want to do that instantly. And that's the IP, the inspiratory pressure. And then you're telling the vent how long you want to keep that pressure, or be on the high pressure here, and that is the I time. And then you're telling the vent how frequent you want to repeat this, and that's the respiratory rate, and then the FiO2. So you have 5 set parameters there. The dependent parameters are tidal volume. So tidal volume, you can't control the tidal volume in pressure control. Tidal volume is not controlled, right? And mean airway pressure, and I to E ratio, and respiratory rate. These are the 4 dependent parameters, right? The flow waveform looks like this. Huge difference between this flow waveform and this flow waveform, right? This flow waveform, the pressure is delivered, the flow shoots up in a 90 degrees angle, so immediate increase in the flow. The maximum flow is reached in the beginning of the breath, and then it decelerates down. And the exhalation is the same. What's the difference between this and this? The breath is being delivered in the beginning of the breath, mostly. And here the majority of the breath is delivered in the middle of the breath, right? Does it make a difference? Huge difference, especially in oxygenation, right? Because I'm gonna take we'll take the tangent later, but just quickly to tell you, what are the characteristics of the gases that we breathe. Each one of them has a function. So basically, CO2 and oxygen and nitrogen, for example. Which one is the fastest diffusible across semi-permeable membrane? Out of the 3. CO2, followed by oxygen. Last and the worst is nitrogen for diffusion, right? So that's why when we breathe 21% oxygen and 79% nitrogen, that's actually good. Why? Because oxygen at some point is going to get absorbed, especially in the lower parts of the lung where the alveoli are not completely inflated. It can potentially absorb all the oxygen into the blood, because it's also the most perfused areas. And if you absorb all the oxygen in the blood, if you're 100% oxygen, the whole alveolus can be collapsed completely, right? And then you come with the next breath and open it again. That's called atelectrauma, and that releases cytokines. I think this is actually that's the reason 100% oxygen causes problems. Not that by the free radicals. I don't think so. I think it's it's called the absorption atelectasis. The absorption atelectasis is what actually caused the injury, the cytokine release and stuff like that from 100% oxygen for a prolonged period of time. Nitrogen, as opposed to that, it just stints the alveoli open because it takes time to diffuse, right? If you don't breathe at all, then of course it will diffuse. But as long as you're going back and forth and have some oxygen and nitrogen there, you're repeating the same cycle, and the nitrogen is staying there, stenting the alveoli open. So it's very useful for that reason. Nitrogen doesn't diffuse it. That's why in cars, we put now, in some of the new kind of advanced cars, we put what? We don't fill it with the air anymore. We fill it with nitrogen, right? So it doesn't diffuse out. You take more time. And that's why, for example, when we have pneumothorax is composed of what the patient is breathing. So the patient is breathing room air. Pneumothorax is 80% nitrogen. We give the patient 100% oxygen, and that is a way for us to make the small pneumothorax disappear. Because by competitive inhibition or competitive replacement, so basically oxygen just goes in a little bit more and more and more into the thing, and the oxygen is easily diffusible, so it diffuses out. Same idea of the air embolism. Bubbles of air, hyperbaric chamber, puts the oxygen inside the bubbles and then it dissolves, right? So that's all nitrogen and oxygen. When you compare oxygen to CO2, we have a lot of implications for that. Basically, CO2, as I said, is very fastly diffusible. So when you ventilate somebody that is having a ventilation problem, like a pH problem, you ventilate like this, right? Normal. When you ventilate somebody that's having oxygenation problem with the ambu bag, you ventilate like this and stay there for a little bit and let go. So basically you're increasing the I time, keeping the oxygen in, allowing the oxygen to... Yeah. When we have somebody with bronchopleural fistula, what do we have? Basically the half of the tidal volume, for example, is coming in the chest tube. We don't have usually we don't have a ventilation problem. We have an oxygenation problem, right? Because the ventilation is easy. The other parts of the lungs and the other lung is actually easy. You just get CO2 and it will give me more. I'll take more CO2. I'll get rid of it. It's easy to diffuse. And then the oxygen. But there's a lot of implications for it. For example, when cardiac arrest, we're using CO2 as our indicator in cardiac arrest. It's for the adequacy of CPR. You press hard, the CO2 rises because the CO2 matches the cardiac output. It's very easy. As long as the cardiac output, CO2 goes in and out and diffuses. In the alveolar equation, if you remember the alveolar equation, which is P alveolar O2 equal P inspired O2 minus the PA CO2 divided by the respiratory quotient, the PA CO2 that we're using for that equation is supposed to be the P alveolar O2, P alveolar CO2, but that's actually difficult to measure, relatively difficult to measure, so they removed it in the equation. They made it P arterial CO2 because it's very close to each other. So a lot of implications of that, but the point I want to make, if you have a mode of ventilation that puts the oxygen in first and then decelerate, it's much better for oxygenation than just building up your breath like this. All right. And that is it.